Emergency rescue. Investors assess the impact of the historic and unprecedented takeover of Credit Suisse. And a major new climate report warns yet again that the world must act now to avoid a catastrophe. Hello and welcome to World Business Report. I'm Tadhg Enright. It has been a day of volatility on the global markets following that unprecedented, historic banking deal, the emergency takeover of the failing bank Credit Suisse by its larger Swiss rival UBS. There were sharp losses in early trading in Europe today, although banking stocks have since rebounded slightly. UBS itself is currently up by 4.5%, a sharp reversal on its fortunes earlier today. Let's have a look now at how the markets are performing more broadly. Trading in the United States began just about an hour ago. You can see there the Dow is up by 0.65 of 1%. The S&P 500 also up by 0.2 of 1%. And in Asia and in Europe, while there was some initial fright taken by investors in early trading, but particularly because certain bondholders in Credit Suisse have lost all the value of their investment, by around the middle of the trading day, most European indices were trading positively, and that's the latest picture right now. The biggest gains there for the CAC 40 in Paris, currently up by 1%. Quite a V-shape in trading today. Now, one aspect of the deal was that any investor holding a certain type of bonds known as additional Tier 1 bonds in Credit Suisse will get nothing out of the deal. They lost all their investment. That's more than 15 billion euros written off for them. Now, this spooked the whole AT1 bond market, which collectively is worth more than 200 billion euros. So let's discuss this in more detail now with Dan Kemp, who's Global Chief Investment Officer at Morningstar Investment Management. Thank you for being with us today, Dan. Just explain for us, why is the burning of these bondholders so controversial?
Well, hello, Tadhg. Yes, that is the key question. And that's what's been driving all of this price volatility that we've seen over the last few hours on the back of what is ostensibly very good news. So these AT1, as you said, are bonds that are low in the capital structure. They rank just above equities. And so equity holders would normally be behind these bonds, which would mean that if these bonds got wiped out, equity holders wouldn't get anything. But in this situation, it's been different. So the equity holders are walking away from this deal with some UBS stock, but the AT1 holders don't get anything. Now, these bonds were deliberately established post the global financial crisis to be loss absorbing. So the fact they're high risk shouldn't surprise anyone. It was just the order with which losses have been taken that have surprised people and led to some concerns in the banking market.
And indeed, we've heard from many central banks, European, the Bank of England, reassuring AT1 bondholders that normal rules will apply in the remote likelihood, obviously, of any further banking failures in their jurisdictions. There we'll have to leave it. Dan Kemp from Morningstar Investment Management, thank you very much for joining us. Well, many aspects of this turmoil have brought back memories of the 2008 banking crisis, prompting questions about banking regulation, how they allowed for such a situation to unfold again. Speaking earlier to the BBC, the chief economist at Allianz, Mohammed El-Erian, put the blame on central bank monetary policy.
The problem with interest rate policy is that we're too low for too long. Then came the time to raise them because inflation was going up and the Federal Reserve did nothing. So by the time it finally recognized its mistake, it had to increase interest rate at the fastest pace we've seen for over 4 decades. And the system was not ready for that shock.
Well, let's talk about the monetary policy, the US Federal Reserve, how it's going to respond in a couple of days now when it makes its latest interest rate decision. Let's speak now to our North America business correspondent, Michelle Fleury, who's in New York for us. And Michelle, with this meeting happening in 2 days, we saw last week the European Central Bank raise its interest rate as it had heavily indicated that it would, in spite of this banking crisis. Any instinct or sign as to whether the Federal Reserve will shift from its expected rise in the interest rate in its forthcoming meeting?
Yeah, I mean, looking backwards, as you said, the ECB, the European Central Bank, didn't flinch. They carried on with their planned 50 basis point interest rate hike, and they demonstrated that they could still fight inflation and use other tools to try and address the sort of contagion fears we've seen in the banking system. Looking at the Federal Reserve this week, I think there is increased pressure for it to do a bit less. You know, there is a saying, you raise interest rates until something breaks, and arguably right now, given the stress on the banking sector, I think that's going to be weighing heavily on the Federal Reserve. So perhaps if you and I had been speaking 2 weeks ago, we might have been saying, well, OK, we're going to see a 50 basis point increase at its meeting, at the end of its meeting on Wednesday. Now the expectation is, well, maybe it will be a 1/4 percentage point hike, or maybe nothing at all, given what is going on. And the fact that you've seen the Federal Reserve deploying some of its toolkit over the weekend, providing more liquidity to other European central banks to make sure they have access to US dollars, suggests that they don't think this problem is contained, and therefore it might be a bit perverse then to continue to raise rates at the same time that you're kind of rolling out other backstop measures.
OK, we'll wait and see. Michelle Fleury, thank you very much for that. Well, let's shift gears now and talk about the environment. A major new report today has again warned that the world must act now to avoid a climate catastrophe. Climate scientists from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, have warned that a key global temperature goal will probably be missed, that being the target to restrict global warming to just 1.5 degrees Celsius by the early 2030s. But they do say that this overshoot can be addressed if rapid carbon cuts are indeed made. Let's talk now to Angela Wilkinson, who's Secretary General of the World Energy Council and joins us now. Angela, you know, we've heard this all before, and there is faith that clean energy can spark the change that's necessary, but what needs to happen to enable that from your perspective?
So what we've heard from the IPCC, I think we've been hearing for 30 years, but the message is getting stronger every time, that action is required now. And we know that part of the solution to the climate change challenge is to transform our energy systems worldwide, and that we need to use all levers now, and that everybody needs to get involved. What I'm pleased about this most recent IPCC report is that it seems to understand and recognise the human dimension of change and behaviours that is needed.
We've been hearing this from the IPCC for 30 years. Act now to avoid catastrophe. Do you get the sense that anyone's actually listening, or listening in the way that they should be?
Yes, I go to many different leadership conversations where a whole range of sectors, a whole range of countries are scrambling to understand what to do. We still tend to talk far too much about just the technology and the investment side. Of course, they're very important, but actually this transformation that's required is unprecedented. It's not as simple as putting 11 men on the moon. It really requires hundreds of thousands of smaller steps and lots of different investments at every single point along the energy value chain.
But we certainly know, Ms. Wilkinson, that we're in an energy crisis right now, sparked by the war in Ukraine. And when you see coal-fired power plants either being reactivated or having their lifespan extended to cope with that, do you think history is going to ultimately view that as a mistake?
I think that governments have no choice but to put in a winter situation energy back into the grid that they can, or into the system that they can. Whether they chose to use coal or take nuclear out of mothball is a political decision rather than an economic or an environmental decision, as far as I can see. And in other countries where they have no options, if they don't burn coal, they're going to cut down forests, and that will be another form of environmental catastrophe. What we need is societies to develop as many options as possible. They need to scale their renewables. They need to cut their emissions from oil and gas. They need to stop methane emissions. They need to increase their carbon sinks, and they need to use direct carbon removal. There's no one size fits all, no single silver or green technology bullet, and everybody, the users, not just the suppliers, are going to have to do their parts.
Angela Wilkinson, Secretary General of the World Energy Council, thank you very much for joining us with that. Don't forget, you can keep in touch with me and the @BBC Business team on social media. I'm @Tadhg Enright. But until next time on World Business Report, it's goodbye for now. Bye-bye.